what we've witnessed over the last few months, really the last few years, but it's become so much more real in the last 2 months, is a bold, direct attack on Western civilization. We saw it on October 7th in visceral, bloody terms. But in some ways, more disturbing is the attacks, the protests, the demonstrations, the riots in support of the barbarians who launched the attack on October 7th in American universities. And it's not that these people love Hamas. It's not that they know anything about Hamas. They don't know where they are. They don't know. They can't identify the river to the sea. They don't know anything. What drives them is not any positive value. It's not anything that they are pro. What drives them is hate. Hate of what? Hate of Western civilization. They despise it. They hate it. They reject it. Their professors have taught them to hate it and reject it, that everything about them, everything about Western civilization is bad. And to the extent that there's anything good, like we're rich, that is all a consequence of colonialism. That's all the consequences of slavery and so on. They undermine every aspect of Western civilization. And the product is these students you see in Colombia and everything else, everywhere else. The left, or the far left certainly, has completely given up on civilization. They have clearly sided with the barbarians. So is it better on the right? Well, if you look at the far right, what you see is people like, Michael Knowles, hearkening back, wishing we could somehow return to a culture of 1220, the year 1220, dominated by religion, convinced that the only thing that can save us from those leftists is Christianity. They want to skip back all the way to the Dark or Middle Ages. That is their conception of saving Western civilization. Indeed, that's a conception of civilization, is religion, faith, and everything that goes with it. And then, so we have attacks on civilization, both from the left and from the right. And then, of course, there are attacks, physical attacks by Hamas, the Islamists all over the world, Russia, in Ukraine, although many of those on the right think that Russia are actually the ones representing Western civilization against all the bad guys in Western Europe who are anti-civilization. And then you've got those who try to defend Western civilization, particularly, let's say on the more moderate right, but who don't know how. They can't define it. They want the wealth and the technology and the prosperity and maybe even the political freedom that is associated with Western civilization. But to them, Western civilization is, at the end of the day, when push comes to shove, it is Christianity. They can't escape Christianity. They can't escape faith. They can't escape altruism. They can't escape collectivism. And even though some of them have very good intentions, they really do care. They're really upset about what's happening at the universities, and they're even upset about what's happening on the far right. They have no tools to defend what is the world around us. The amazing life, prosperity, achievement that we have, that we are the beneficiaries of, centuries of progress and knowledge and wealth. So they were impotent in defending the West. And this is partially why, to a large extent, why the bad guys are doing so well. Because those who try to defend the West are doing such a poor, pathetic job. And indeed, by defending it on the basis of religion, indeed undermining the whole case for. So, what we want to talk about tonight, and I think to a large extent the rest of the conference, the number of talks that kind of connect to this theme, is what is Western civilization? How do we define it? What does it really mean? If it's not religion, still have to make that case, then what is it? What are we fighting for? What is the positive that we are fighting for? And of course, is it worth it? And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because I think everybody here knows that it's worth it. We live amazing lives. Long, relatively healthy, relatively peaceful, here in the US at least. You know, we still have amazing technology. We still have amazing stuff going on in all of our lives. We're still politically free. We're still personally free and economically free, certainly relative to, distant history. What we have is worth saving. It's worth fighting for. But we need to have the right tools to do it. With the wrong tools, we fail. With the wrong allies, we fail. Because our allies can undermine the ideas that we are actually fighting for. So, as you'll see, I think you agree with me, that Western civilization is not just not Christianity, but indeed, I would argue that Christianity undermines Western civilization. Western civilization or Christianity is the enemy. It's not just, a innocent force. It's not just something that has no impact. It has a huge impact. And the impact is overwhelmingly negative. And we have to become real advocates for the right ideas and clearly distance ourselves from ideas that are destructive to what we're trying to achieve. So let's think about this idea of civilization. What is civilization? What does it mean to say civilization? What constitutes a civilization? Well, it's, I looked up a number of descriptions, and, civilization is a complex human society, that has certain characteristics, cultural characteristics, technological characteristics of development and achievement. Right? To call something civilized is to say that it's in some way promoting human life, certainly within the context of the period in which it existed, certainly as compared to what happened before. Like today, if we look back at Mesopotamian civilization, we say barbarians. But in the context of Mesopotamia, they suddenly had the rule of law. They had certain accounting practices. They had a certain currency that now you could trade. It was a massive achievement as compared to what happened before. And of course, the civilizations that came afterwards were achievements as compared to what happened before. Might not have been as compared looking backwards, but you can't judge looking backwards. You have to judge in the context of when the civilization happened. So a civilized society is typically one that, develops a culture that has art, that has literature, science, architecture, technology, some economic activity. And again, you can identify with each one of these ancient civilizations, you can identify that they all have that. Again, it might all be very primitive looking backwards, but at the time, it was an achievement. Civilizations are achievements, and they embody achievements. And, we know Mesopotamia was a civilization. Egypt was, obviously Greece and Rome. And then what? Was the West always civilized? When did the West become civilized? When can we categorize something called Western civilization? West refers to basically, historically, Western Europe, and today the United States and parts of Asia. But historically, Western Europe. When did Western Europe become civilized? Was Western Europe civilized when it was dominated by Christianity? Was Western Europe civilized in the post-Rome era? And the answer is no. It was a period of destruction. It was a period of poverty. It was a period in which Europe produced very little, created nothing of value. And look, there's a lot of revisionist historians out there that will tell you they made this little achievement or that little achievement. A lot of those achievements, they're copying somebody else. And the achievements are small, tiny, in comparison to what comes after or in comparison to what came before. One of the characteristics of civilization is urbanism, the people going and living in cities. Cities, to a large extent, represent civilization. We interact with a lot of people. We trade, division of labor. We benefit from division of labor and expertise and specialization. Rome, the city of Rome, peaked at over 1 million people in somewhere around 200 AD. Over 1 million people. 200 years later, it's maybe at 30,000. It bottoms at like 10,000. And then slowly the population rises. But when the next city in Europe to reach 1 million people, when that happens? London in the 19th century. So 1,700 years later. And it's not like other cities thrived because Rome descended. No, nothing thrived. The art, if you think about Greek art, if you think about Greek sculpture, even Greek paintings, the remnants that we have, or Roman copies of Greek art and Roman art, and then you think about what happens in the Middle Ages or the Dark Ages and in the Middle Ages, and it's pathetic. It's a huge decline. Even look at the standard of living, the quality of life, the kind of homes. In every respect, civilization disappears. And what is the dominant philosophy? What is the dominant ideology? What is the dominant religion during this time? It's Christianity. Christianity had it all. We were, the West was barbaric. Little, small city-states fighting with each other, empires being established and collapsing. The great achievements of the Middle Ages are some of the courts, some of the kings and courts got to copy ancient books and preserve them for future generations. Good. I'm glad they did that. But nothing original. Except with regard to Christianity. They wrote a lot about Christianity. They analyzed every comma and every paragraph and every iota, everything in the ancient books. But in terms of new, nothing. In terms of architecture, the only thing can come up with is a cathedral. Just keep that image of a cathedral in your mind. It took decades, sometimes centuries to build them. Dozens of people, hundreds of people died often in the construction. Just think about the material wealth that was taken from people who could barely survive because they were subsistence farmers, and now they had to pay for this. I know people love cathedrals. I think of them in monstrosities because of what they represent. And of course, they're there to do what? To make you feel small in the face of religion, in the face of God. So, there was no Western civilization when Christianity dominated. And indeed, at the same time, there were other civilizations. There was a Chinese civilization. You can go back, you can see laws, you can see technology, you can see some advancement. Again, in the context of the time, not bad at all. Or an Islamic civilization, which had significant advances in mathematics, medicine, science. They were actually civilizations. The West was not one. And the easiest way is to compare life in the West, life during a brief period in Islam, and even life in China. And it's dramatically better in these other places. They're richer, they're more prosperous, they're doing much better. So when does Western civilization really become, or when is it born, if you will? I think most of you know the story, but it's when they, in a sense, rediscover Athens. Ben Shapiro wrote a book about the origins of Western civilization, and he wrote that Western civilization is the merger and combination of Jerusalem, representing the Judeo-Christian tradition, and Athens. But indeed, when Jerusalem was left alone, what we got is the barbarism of the Dark Ages, of the Middle Ages. It's only bringing Athens to people's awareness, and particularly Aristotle, by Aquinas and Abelard and many other thinkers of the Middle Ages, start talking about it, start writing about it, and start integrated into their ideas, that the seeds of Western civilization, the seeds are planted. And those seeds flower in what we call today the Renaissance. A Renaissance not of biblical scholarship, a Renaissance of ancient philosophy, but primarily art and aesthetics. They flourish when we get artists inspired by what they discover people did over 1,000 years earlier. They discover the sculptures of Rome, the sculptures of Greece, and they're blown away. They discover the ruins of the Parthenon, and they don't know how they built that. They have no clue. And because those seeds had been planted a couple of centuries earlier, the ideas of thinking, reasoning, applying that in arts, and you go to you look at the Renaissance art, and it's the themes are often very religious, right? They're still inspired, right, by Christianity. It's still there. But if you compare a scene, even take a crucifixion in the Middle Ages and a crucifixion in the Renaissance, and it's a completely different universe. The crucifixion in the Middle Ages is badly done. There's no identity to Jesus, right? There's no anatomy. There's no reality. It's just a symbol. You look at the crucifixion in the Renaissance, and it's in this world. You can identify a world. The world is knowable. The world is visible. And that's a human being, and a human being with muscular and anatomy. They know anatomy, and they have perspective, and there's a background, and there's a reality to it that just doesn't exist before, because the whole orientation has changed. The orientation now is towards reality. It's not about religious symbolism. It's primarily about the reality. Now, the message is often still religious, because that is not gone. But the way they approach reality is completely changed. Their sense of life, their epistemology, the way they look at the world, the way they study the world. Think about perspective. Perspective is an achievement. Now, today, if you take a drawing class or painting class, it's taught. Everybody knows perspective. But think about the fact that nobody did until a certain point in the Renaissance. It's discovered and it's taught, and it's studied, and they figure it out, and the different methods in which to draw it, and they develop it, and it changes everything. And of course, the orientation is what? Towards reality, and towards our mind observing reality, understanding reality, and then being able to recreate it. So if you think about arts, everything changes in the Renaissance. Everything. The style changes, and ultimately the subjects change as well. And if you go north to Northern Europe, very secular subjects. They've given up on religious subjects fairly early. They go beyond the achievements of the Greeks and the Romans. They improve. The art of the Renaissance is a step forward beyond what the history has given us. And then even in architecture, right? They don't quite know what to do with the Parthenon, but they can still build the dome on the Duomo in Florence. For years, it sits without a dome because nobody can figure it out. But they figure it out, which is a major achievement, and architecture takes off during this period. And then, of course, ultimately, so does science. A little slower than the art. But again, this orientation towards reality versus the orientation towards another life generates ultimately the scientists, the beginning of science. Copernicus, Galileo, Kepler. You know that for 1,000 years, I found this stunning. I read this in a book, and I think it's true. For 1,000 years, from somewhere around the fall of Rome to somewhere around in the middle of the Renaissance, nobody made astronomical observations in the West. Like, astronomical observations were one of the first things people did. They looked up the skies, and they wondered what they were, and they started measuring stuff, and this is what the Greeks did, the Romans did, and then nothing. During that Christian period, during the period of the Middle Ages, just no observations that were being made. In the Muslim world, observations were being made. In other parts of the world, observation, but in Christianity, that was not allowed. And suddenly, when the orientation changes again, instead of to an afterlife and instead into ancient books and truth from a book, when people start searching for truth in the world out there, they look up and then they start making the observations again. And if I'm wrong about the no observations, Keith will let me know afterwards. So the Renaissance is a period of awakening, not just the rediscovery of ideas and art from the past, but taking it, at least in the aesthetics, a step forward, doing original, new, better. It's a period of a civilization starting, rebirth of a civilization. It's still a mess in Europe. It's still fragmented. There's still wars. People are still killing each other all over the place. I mean, some of the bloodiest wars in human history were fought in the early 17th century, the 30-Year War, where with Catholics and Protestants slaughtered each other in mass. It's still not exactly some place you would call civilized. There are moments in particular places, yes, but there's no Western civilization, even during the Renaissance, in terms of just how ugly life is. And it still is. The poverty, remember the arts and the ideas and the thinking, it's still a relatively small group of people doing it. But it's the beginning. And that beginning ultimately grows into what we call the Enlightenment. And this now is a period, a real intellectual revolution. This now is a period where those seeds planted by the discovery of Aristotle's writings, those seeds have generated a focus on reality rather than on ancient books and an afterlife. Those seeds are now bearing real fruit. This is a period of new thinking. For the first time in the modern world, we get philosophers writing about new ideas. Most of them are wrong, but they've attached themselves from the truth is in that ancient book, or the truth is in ancient philosophy, and we have nothing to add, and now they're adding. You know, it's not great, but it's a move forward. Whether it's Bacon or Descartes or, the beginning of the Enlightenment is really Spinoza and ultimately, and Hobbes, and then ultimately, of course, John Locke, who in many ways changes everything, or at least brings forward some of the key ideas of what the Enlightenment is about. They're trying to understand the world. They're trying to understand the world in a secular way. They're trying to understand the world using reason. Not ancient books, not revelation, reason. They're trying to understand what is going on. Again, many of them very flawed. But this is an effort, a beginning. There's a growing respect for reason, the senses, the mind. And of course, with John Locke, there's a respect for the individual. You get that already in the art of the Renaissance. But for the first time now, you're getting it manifest in ideas. People are talking about individuals and rights of individuals. And this is the beginning of a real revolution. It happens, of course, at the same time, because of this respect for reason, the respect for the world out there, as a scientific revolution is going on. Newton and dozens and dozens of scholars and scientists, and you get the founding of groups of scientists who come together to do research together and to think about these things together. The most famous of which is the Royal Society in London, where Newton is the president at some point, and scientists are getting together to discuss ideas, present papers, present hypotheses, and discuss them and debate them based on reason, based on evidence, science. During this period, there's something called the Republic of Letters. I find that this is fascinating, particularly for a pre-internet world, right? There are thousands of people around Europe writing letters, and the United States, because by this point, people like Franklin and Jefferson are participating, writing letters to each other, basically writing essays to one another and commenting on each other's work. And they're writing to each other. Voltaire, I think, wrote 15,000 letters in his life. And we're not talking about a 3-word email like I write, but we're talking about real intellectual content that people are sharing with one another and exchanging ideas. It was called the Republic of Letters, a republic because it was so vast. And these intellectuals all over Europe, it's now spreading. It starts in England and France, but it's Germany, and it's, as I said, the United States, and it's Italy, and it's everywhere. A big project during this period is in France. They're going to write the first encyclopedia. I mean, think about this. They want to document in writing all the knowledge in the world. They put it down in writing. It's this magnificent project. And they get all the leading intellectuals of the time to write essays about all kinds of topics, from, science and arts and philosophy and mathematics and everything is, they have drawings, and including the practical art. How you, make a nail, things, everything is documented, everything. And think about that kind of project. Would have been impossible 200 years earlier. Nobody would have conceived of it. Knowledge, all the knowledge in the world, it's already there. It's called the Bible. And, this is done by people who are, particularly the two editors of the encyclopedia, are explicit atheists. One of them, Diderot, is sent to jail because he's an atheist and has to kind of tone it down for the rest of his life in order not to return to jail. A lot of these intellectuals are working in environments that are very, very difficult, where then there's no free speech. Voltaire has to live in Geneva. He wants to live in Paris. So it's difficult for them. And yet they are changing the world around them. The idea of economic progress, the idea of growth, an economy can grow, that we can achieve greater and greater and greater wealth and greater prosperity, comes out of this period. It's a period where they're embracing reason explicitly. They're talking about reason. They're talking about what it means and how important it is in life. And this is the way we know the world. We can't count on what's come before. We have to discover for ourselves what is true and what is not. They don't get it completely right. We'll get to that. And of course, they're challenging the dogma of religion. They're making fun of religion. They're attacking religion. They're fighting against religion. Most of them are still religious, but they hate the dogma of it. And they want it to be marginalized, to play not an important part. Reason is what they believe is how we know almost everything. They still leave a little room for faith. Again, Diderot is an exception, not the rule. They embrace, individualism, following John Locke and the idea of individual rights. But some of these French Enlightenment figures are trying to think about an alternative moral code to Christianity. They can't figure it out, and they don't figure it out. They don't come up with a solution, but they're thinking about it. And the pursuit of happiness is part of what comes out of this. Life is good. Like, happiness should be pursued. This is good. They don't quite know what to do with that. But this is the direction that they're heading. You're getting individualism, the worth of the individual, that the individual is the unit that matters politically. And of course, all of this comes together with the greatest achievement of the Enlightenment. The greatest achievement in the Enlightenment is what? It's this country. It's the United States of America. The founding fathers were men of the Enlightenment. They were part of the Republic of Letters. They were communicating with thinkers, and they were reading each other's books. And they wanted to build a country based on these principles. The principles of reason and individual rights, of reason and individualism, and political liberty as a consequence of the fact that each one of us can reason. And force being the enemy of reason, you know the argument. And the outcome is the creation of this country. This is the political fruition of the Age of Enlightenment. And the consequence in the following 100 years, following, the Enlightenment is 1650, let's say, to 1800, just generally, or 1792 to the French Revolution. The consequence of the world we have. Since then, capitalism, relative political freedom, wealth, art, peace in the 19th century, relative peace in Europe from the Napoleonic Wars until the World War I. This is Western civilization. Western civilization is a product of this. It's a product of the Enlightenment. It's a product of the idea of reason. It's a product of the idea of individualism. It's a product of the idea of America. The idea of individual rights, the idea of political liberty. It is a civilization that grew up or matured from the Renaissance to the Enlightenment, but was really created during the Enlightenment. And everything we have is a consequence of those ideas. Sadly, the philosophers of the Enlightenment were flawed. They didn't quite understand the full defense of reason as our basic means of survival, reason as our only means of knowledge. They didn't have it philosophically down. They didn't come up with an alternative to a Christian morality. They tried, they pushed, they experimented, but they couldn't do it. They had this sense of life. Pursuit of happiness appears in our Declaration of Independence as a consequence, right? The right of the individual to his life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. But they didn't have an alternative to altruistic Christian morality. And even with all of those flaws, we get the world that we get. We get the prosperity of the last 150 years. And of course, as a consequence of these weaknesses, they get attacked immediately, starting from within, from among them. Rousseau is the first, but then Hume and Kant and all the rest of the philosophers after that. And of course, Christianity's always in the background, pushing against these ideas, rebelling against the progress that is happening, rebelling against the idea of reason, rebelling against individualism. It's always there. And the consequence of the failure of the Enlightenment and the rebellion of the intellectuals and the bad ideas is the horrors of the early 20th century, World War I, World War II, and of course the mixed economy that we have. We don't have capitalism. But we survived. We survived as a civilization. And we survived as a civilization because of the power of these ideas. We still have some political economic freedom. Technology and science are still advancing. Economic growth still exists. We're prosperous. We're militarily strong. We have skyscrapers. We survived because of those ideas. The power of those ideas is so mighty that in spite of all the attacks against them, our culture resists, barely, but it resists, and we push forward. It can't go on forever. Can't go on forever. But we live in a civilization like no other in history. Greatest civilization in human history, Western civilization, is indeed great. Those moral relativists, multiculturalists, don't know what they're talking about. This is the place to live, but it could be so much better. And particularly now, it seems all to be hanging on a thread. It's attacked by the mystics, the altruists, the collectivists, from every direction, from every side. And we have no allies. There's very few voices here and there defending reason and enlightenment. And when they do, it's weak because they don't have a philosophical backbone. They don't really have the justification. They're stuck in a philosophy that is as developed as it was in the Enlightenment. Nothing has progressed since then. So this is a civilization clearly worth saving. We know how to. Ayn Rand has given us the tools. Our job is to save the Enlightenment. Come to Ankar's talk tomorrow about saving the Enlightenment. We have the philosophical tools that Ayn Rand is giving us to defend reason properly. We have the philosophical tools that Ayn Rand has given us to defend a moral code, to junk altruism, and to stand for individualism, to stand for self-interest, to stand for the morality of selfishness. Now, our job, therefore, is to complete the revolution they started, the founders of this country, but the entire intellectual world of the Enlightenment. They started something amazing. They created something amazing. We need to finish it by trashing the morality of altruism. Go to Ben's talk on the 4th of July, I think it is, on how to replace altruism with rational self-interest and to complete the Enlightenment revolution or the American revolution. At the end of the day, looking out at all the different forces out there in the world today, there's only one force that can save Western civilization. There's only one set of ideas that is good enough to save the West, to save what we value about the world in which we live. And that force is us. Nobody else will do it. It's either all of us or civilization will decay. So go out there and continue fighting. Thank you. No water.
This may be a long answer, but can you elaborate on how Aristotle's ideas gave birth to Western civilization?
Um, Basically, what Aristotle does, and it's a good question to ask some of the philosophers in the room to get more depth answer. But basically, what Aristotle's philosophy is advocating for is reason, is the use of our mind to understand the world. In many respects, Aristotle sets us up. I mean, he's the first scientist. He's the first person who's going out there in the world and trying to figure out exactly how things work. So it's reason. But then, of course, he also have an ethic, a morality that is focused on the individual, focused on your own flourishing, your own success as an individual. So he brings those two ideas that I think are what Western civilization is: reason and individualism, or the idea of the individual pursuing, his own well-being in some way. And we might not agree, we don't agree with Aristotle on how you do that, but the focus on self, the focus on the individual flourishing. It's those two ideas that he brings in that then mature, that lead us ultimately to the Enlightenment and lead us to Western civilization.
Thank you.
Thanks for the talk. Why do you think modern thinkers always uphold democracy as the hallmark of civilization?
Well, I mean, for a number of reasons. One, I think that they, so the positive side of that is that they recognize that people should be autonomous. They should be able to decide for themselves, and democracy is representing a political manifestation of that, of going out and expressing yourself politically. They view as crucial, and coming out of, again, Enlightenment ideas about the sovereignty of the individual, and that there should be no sovereign over the individual. But they're also, poisoned by ideas. They don't quite understand force. They don't understand, the dangers of democracy, the evil of democracy. Although, again, Enlightenment figures warned them about it, right? I mean, Madison writes quite well about why democracy is a dangerous thing when we mean majority rule by it, right? When we mean the majorities can vote on anything, then what do? They oppress minorities. So I think it comes from this idea of collectivism and group sovereignty, and they haven't abandoned the collectivism, and they want to be collectivists without having an authoritarian leader. So they allow the group to dictate, the lives of individuals, or the lives of the minority in the political system, and dominate them. So it's the collectivism. They haven't given up on collectivism. They never really understood the concept of individual rights, or they don't today. I think they had a much better understanding of that 250 years ago.
Hi, Yaron. Thanks for being here. It's Amy. So this is sort of a suggestion. So basically, in the meantime, while ARI is doing a fantastic job of developing young people to go into the universities and teach and spread the correct ideas, rational ideas. In the meantime, you mentioned, the idea of who are our allies right now. We don't really have allies. And I wonder what you think, or if you have any thoughts about objectivists here and elsewhere, how we can actually start more of a global community where we can help each other out. Mutual aid societies, or just be in contact with each other to get through these difficult times, especially our objectivist friends who come out of Mexico and South America, who are under the gun right now from ICE.
Yeah. I mean, look, I don't think we have allies. Again, we might have allies on a particular issue and a particular point, but we don't have allies in the mission to save Western civilization. The errors, if the better ones who are only making errors are too large, and many of them are not making errors. They're evading and they're just bad. They're bad guys. So we don't have any allies in that sense, and that means that this community, this movement, needs to support each other, yes, but needs to be activated and engaged. And I don't have any particular methodology by which you should do that. That's your job, right? But I think you should view it. This is a great networking event. It's a great place to meet people and to engage, to find ways of shared interest, to find areas where you share values, you share interests, you can stay in touch. I mean, today, it's so much easier to do whatever it is that we do because of the internet, because of communication technology. We can stay in touch, we can communicate, we can help, we can assist. There's so many different ways to help people who we want to help. But there are also just ways to connect so we can join the fight and engage with the culture and work to change the world. Jonathan.
Thank you, Dr. Thank you, Dr. Brook, for this talk and to everything that you and ARI do to promote Mr. Rand's work and legacy throughout the world. Shortly put, you have your finger on the cultural zeitgeist. Why is collectivism in and individualism out right now?
I mean, I don't know that individualism was in recent history. I think I think the trend towards collectivism has, begun a long time ago and is slowly growing and slowly getting intense. We get faked out once in a while by the Tea Party or something like that. We think something's happening, but it turns out it's not. It turns out we got faked out and there's nothing really individualistic there. They were collectivists pretending, right? So I think the collectivism is just on this path because of bad ideas. In America, the progressive movements and the welfare state and the mixed economy promote, as Ayman described it, promote pressure groups and the formation of tribes in order to fight over the fixed pie or the perception of a fixed pie, which that increases collectivism. The longer you live on a mixed economy, the more people are looking for people to align with to try to grab a piece because that's the only way they know how to get something. So I think it's just the time under a mixed economy, and there's a slow erosion of the American spirit. I mean, there's a whole talk to be given about what's happened in the last, I'd say since 9/11, the last 25 years, and how 9/11 basically demolished our confidence in America, in American security, in America being an exceptional place, in America's ability to project power into the world. Iraq and Afghanistan were complete disasters, which I think really demoralized Americans. And then you got the financial crisis that led us all to think that capitalism was worthless, that capitalism was bad, and that was hopeless. And that is another hit against everything. And again, the intellectuals are supporting this. This is all because of the intellectuals and how they interpret all this. And what we're seeing today is the impact of collectivism and the slow disappearance of the American sense of life. So the American sense of life slowly being chipped away at, I think particularly since 9/11. And what we're seeing today is collectivism in the form of particularly barbaric form of tribalism, political tribalism, thought, people not thinking for themselves, the lack of any kind of individuality or any kind of independent thought. And it's difficult to reverse without ideology to replace the existing collectivism and the existing altruism. There's just nowhere for them to go other than everything conventional is collectivistic and altruistic.
Hello, thanks for the talk. Is it possible, or is there an identifiable pathway to getting modern popular intellectuals, such as Peterson, maybe Dawkins, Joe Rogan? That last one's a joke.
Yeah, I was going to say intellectuals.
But getting popular intellectuals to engage with our ideas.
Look, I don't know what no, because they don't want to engage in our ideas. Like, it's not like Jordan Peterson hasn't read Atlas Shrugged twice, as far as I can tell. He knows they exist. He's read them. He's kind of engaged with them, right? He's talked to some people about them, but he can't he can't understand them. He can't, because there's something about his philosophy that is just blocks him, and he won't go there. It would cause him to have to rethink so much of what he believes in. But it's like, what else can you do if somebody reads Atlas Shrugged twice? And what am I going to say, or anybody going to say, or Anka's going to say, or Greg's going to say to him that'll change his mind and engage with? So they engage superficially. Kendra, who else did you mention? Peterson. Who's the other one? Dawkins. Yeah, Dawkins, I think, is hopeless. I mean, he's committed to altruism. And what did he say? He's a cultural Christian. He then backtracked because people went after him. But he's a cultural Christian because he can't let go of the Christianity, can't let go of the altruism. The altruism is what really makes Christianity appeal to him, because he hates the mysticism, right? Or take Sam Harris, who clearly knows stuff about Ayn Rand, who knows objectivism, and won't have anything to do with objectivists, right? He'll talk to all kinds of weird people. Joe Rogan, right? All kinds of complete nuts, but Joe Rogan will not have an objectivist. It's like there's a line in the sand. You can be a Nazi apologist. You can be, a Hamas lover. You can be on the far left, on the far right. Joe Rogan will talk to you. What you cannot be is an objectivist. And it's not because they don't know what objectivism is. Maybe it's because they do know what it is. Look, I mean, I really believe this, and I know this is super disappointing. We are not going to be saved by converting some major intellectual. It's not going to happen. We are going to be saved by the group of new young intellectuals who you're going to see up on stage over the next week. If it's not them, it's nobody. You are going to save us. Those intellectuals are going to save us. Jordan Peterson is just dragging us deeper into the quicksand. I mean, he is. He's making it worse. He's not making it better, because he's elevating religion, and he's elevating Christianity or religion in one form or another. And that, by doing that, he is sinking Western civilization. I mean, I really mean it. Christianity is the enemy. So I am a militant atheist because I think it's what's required today. Yeah.
Dr. Brook, what is your projection of what the future of Western civilization will be?
I mean, look, if we win, and I think we will, I just don't know when, but there's no limit, right? I mean, our capacity to create, to build, to make, to remake, to change the world around us is just magnificent and beautiful and hard to imagine. I mean, and literally, I'm not a good, it's not good to ask me. You have to ask like a sci-fi writer. What does Western civilization look like when we win? Amazing. Beautiful. I mean, think about the beauty, just everything being beautiful, and the fact that everybody around you is productive and engaged and committed to this world. And not everybody's an objectivist, but everybody is engaged with the world, and engaged in activity, and engaged in changing their little slice of the world and pursuing their happiness. And that is such a different world than what we have today in terms of your day-to-day interactions, in terms of the tech you might have, in terms of the biotech we might have. We might all live forever. I don't, who knows? All we know is that it's really, really, really good. How that good actually, is manifest in reality. You need a big imagination for that, bigger than mine.
Speaking of Jordan Peterson, I know you recently said you gave a course for his academy. So I was wondering about the wisdom of doing that, if you thought maybe it gives him a sanction he doesn't deserve, or if it's worth it to reach a broader audience.
Like if you go to university, I mean, we all go to, we teach at universities and we go places. If the Peterson Academy was focused just on Jordan Peterson and his kind of accolades, I wouldn't do it. But he's saying it's a broad kind of university thing. They're going to bring people from different views. And I've seen them, Shermer was there, and they're bringing people from different perspectives, not just Jordan Peterson. I go and speak at universities. Universities are just as corrupt, right? In a sense of they have a particular agenda, and yet we speak and we teach and we encourage people to teach at these universities. So I view it as another college, another university that I'm speaking at. I don't like the people who run all the other universities or colleges, are not my intellectual allies. And so, yep.
I was taught in school 5 to 10 years ago that there's no such thing as Western civilization. That it's a white colonialist construct.
Yeah.
No.
I mean, yeah. So, it's nothing special. It's nothing good. There's nothing good about it. I just read a history book. It basically says there's no such thing as Western civilization, and all the ideas in the West are a mixture of ideas that come from all over elsewhere around the world. So, because you've got, I don't know, some idea that originated in some other continent, you can't call it Western anymore. It's just they have a very concrete, bizarre way of thinking about these conceptual ideas.
How do we restore pride in a culture that doesn't take pride in itself?
Well, I mean, but you have to think about why don't they take pride in themselves? They don't take pride in themselves because they be taught that the ideas, the fundamental ideas that make the West the West, are bad, are wrong, are wrong philosophically, are wrong in practice. So you have to go back to how the civilization was created. You have to go back to these founding ideas, these principles that made the West the West. If we appreciate reason, we'll appreciate Western civilization. If we appreciate individualism, we'll appreciate Western civilization. If we hate reason, if we reject reason because we're postmodernists, or we reject reason because we're religionists, we can't appreciate Western civilization. We're going to undermine it and undercut it. So the only way to gain that appreciation is to teach, to advocate for the basic philosophical ideas. There are no shortcuts.
Thank you.
Good evening.
Hi.
So one of the things that I wanted to pick back up on, you had mentioned that there was a philosopher who had read Atlas Shrugged twice. And so one of the things that I just can't seem to comprehend is like, why is it so easy for people to evade truth when they've heard the truth? Why don't they interact with it? I mean, why is it so easy for them to base themselves off of things that are arbitrary?
Hi. I don't know. It didn't work for me. I mean, all I had to do is read it once, and I was captured. Look, it depends when you read the book, how much you've got invested in your alternative philosophy. Objectivism challenges your fundamental beliefs on everything. You have to be very, very honest to be able to engage with that, to be able to be willing to be challenged on all these fundamental ideas. And if you've built up a life around a certain set of ideas and you engage with these ideas, it's difficult to say, scrap all that, I'm starting over. And, it's not an accident that objectivism appeals to young people primarily, not exclusively, but primarily, because when you're young, you still haven't accumulated all that investment in a particular set of ideas, and you can change much more readily. You're much more open to something new and to new ideas and to discovering the truth. But why psychologically? I'm not. I don't know. I wish I knew.
Thank you.
We've got a question from the online audience.
All right.
So Richard Dawkins says that we are instruments of our genes. What is your rebuttal to that idea?
What is my rebuttal to the idea that we're instruments of our genes? Well, the facts that I experience making choices, using my mind, focusing my mind every day. The fact that I can choose to do to live a different life, to bring my mind into focus, and I can see people who choose not to. So you experience the fact of free will. You experience the fact of using your mind in a particular way, guided by you, guided by something that is not just your genes. So life is a rebuttal, I guess. A self-reflective life is a rebuttal. Your mic's off. Yeah.
Hello. Okay. Hi. Thank you, Yaron. Thought I'd try and end on a positive note. I'm always looking for the simplest way to say things that gets through to people, obviously. And I found a couple lines that work that might be helpful to this audience. One is when I introduce Ayn Rand, one of the things I say about her is that she has done for philosophy what Newton did for physics. And then I just watch people's reaction. It gets their attention. In terms of religion, there's a line that I use that I usually do not get much pushback on. I say, asking people to say something is true that contradicts the evidence of their eyes and their brain is being disrespectful. Period. That summarizes my view of religion.
That's good. They have to take the next step, the things they then have to do. If that incentivizes them to do that, that's wonderful. Is that a last question? All right, let's make this the last question.
Well, that works. Thank you, Yaron. Always a pleasure. Like everybody else in this room, I'm super excited about all of the new intellectuals that are emerging from the tremendous efforts that the Ayn Rand Institute is putting forth. It is, however, painfully obvious, and you don't have to walk very far outside the doors of this hotel to experience what is currently a horrible state of and failure of our public education in this country. The high schools, the colleges, and starting much younger than that, kids who can't read, they can't count back change, they're not being encouraged to read Rand. In your opinion, in addition to privatization of education, what else can we as a community do to promote saving Western civilization, starting with education, in addition, of course, to supporting ARI?
Well, I think it's going to be very difficult to do anything without privatizing education. So whether that means a complete privatization of all of education, to some extent politically is a fantasy, or working on private schools and getting private schools open and getting kids into private schools and finding different models by which to finance those private schools and funding, and then, of course, developing good curriculum for those private schools, curriculum that actually teaches kids how to think and teaches kids real content. That's the biggest challenge we face, because if they come out of school without the basic tools, it's very difficult for them then to engage as adults with deeper philosophical content or with challenging content. One of the reasons, again, for the growing collectivism is the decline of the quality of education. As people's ability to think for themselves decline, they rely more on the group. If you can't think for yourself, you experience the emotion of fear. People who are afraid huddle up in groups and look for somebody to save them. You're seeing that right now. We've got politicians who present themselves as saviors, and we've got a public that is eager to embrace saviors. And that goes to this whole idea of they can't think for themselves. They don't know how to. They haven't experienced it. The education system has failed them completely. Of course, they failed themselves because many of us went to public education and survived. So they failed themselves, but education is a huge part of it. And it's going to be very difficult to fundamentally, on a scale, change the culture unless we can change the educational system. And what I mean by that is not tinkering with it. I mean wholesale change and presenting people with an alternative that is private education. All right. Thank you. I have to wish my wife happy birthday. Yes. Like almost every year, her birthday is at Ocon, and I can't take her out to a nice dinner, which sucks. So, I appreciate everything she does to support me. I couldn't be here without her. I don't have a life without her. So, my love of my life. Thank you every time. Thanks, everybody. Happy birthday.